So this is the Zen and the Art of Open Source session. Thank you for coming. And I am Paula, yet another QR code. If you'd like to connect to me on LinkedIn, I love that stuff. I'm not too active on X, but I do retweet a lot of interesting stuff, and I'm on GitHub, Paula. Easy to remember. Thanks for the clap. I'm a field CTO with NearForm. I'm very honored to represent NearForm on the board of the OpenJS Foundation, and you heard from the wonderful Robin Ginn this morning at the keynote. I also really love the Grace Hopper celebration and the Anita B organization. I was co-chair for Open Source Day this year, and I am a fan of FINOS. I live in Boston, many other shenanigans. And this talk basically came because I am kind of an aficionado for practices. So I practice golf. I had my oldest son, the larger of the two there, in the convenient carrying case then. They did taekwondo. My youngest plays the bassoon, which is an instrumental practice I also play, and then I also followed them and practiced taekwondo. So I'm a big fan of practices, and that carries through to my software engineering career. And when I involve myself in a practice, I always look for great practitioners. So in software, it's, Ada Lovelace was the first computer programmer, and you might recognize, it looks a little familiar, that punch card that she came up with to tell the computer what to do or the computing machine what to do, and this is mine from my days at IBM. So Ada Lovelace was really, pioneer there. And then Grace Hopper, of course, the woman who thought that you could actually speak to a computer in a more humanish language, higher level language, mother of the compiler. Margaret Hamilton, during her work at NASA, putting people on the moon, she started to call what she was doing software engineering. And she got laughed at by her colleagues who were building the actual rockets and things. But actually, she was referring to her work as software engineering, as an engineering discipline, and here we are. And then last but not least, Christine Peterson. I don't think we would all be here in the same kind of capacity in the same discussions today if she had not coined open source as the way that we would look at this source code going forward. So I always look for great practitioners. I'm going to share probably 5 or 6 of those practitioners here with you today so that you can add them to your practice. And my practice, looking at source code, and you've heard all about this today, I'm kind of standing on the shoulders of giants and echoing things. My practice has 3 tenets: self-awareness, safe consumption, strategic contribution. And all of the practices have tenets. Taekwondo has 5 tenets. Music has 6 basic elements of music theory. Golf has kind of 5 rules of etiquette, the highest level, and a zillion rules. So I think that with any kind of practice like this, you understand the tenets and you learn from great practitioners. So the first one, I actually think is the hardest one, just self-awareness. Now, I do work with companies who may still say, we just don't do open source, and I'm like you, could we have a look at your website or your mobile app or whatnot? And I like to think about, what does software mean to your organization? What does the hello world mean to your organization? You meditate on the flame if you're a meditator. So my meditation started, when did I write my first line of code? So that's me in 1976. In my later years of high school, when I was not the prom queen, so I got an opportunity to go for a week at Slippery Rock State College to learn BASIC. Dartmouth Basic, and I would scribble the program in a notebook, take it to a key punch it on 5-hole punch paper tape, which is even before this. So I didn't really know, back then I was writing dice games, I loved it, but I didn't really learn anything about what software might mean to me, so I learned it from my employers. I went to Penn State, got harvested from IBM. I do not have a computer science degree. I was a math major, and in those days, IBM would harvest you and put you through, 560 hours of training and all of the things, the data structures, algorithms, the whole 9 yards. So at that time, 1983, IBM was a hardware manufacturer, and I emphasize the was in these slides because this was a while ago. This is a picture of a hard drive, 5 megabytes. It weighed almost a ton. It would not have enough storage capacity to hold this presentation. And I wrote software for IBM program products. It was a proprietary language. It was 360 assembly in a language called PLAS, or PLAS, PL1 in assembly. And I worked in manufacturing automation group because we were a manufacturing company and we were digitizing drawings and the transfer of drawings to build the hardware. I also had the opportunity to take my first antitrust training at IBM, and emphasis on the first. At that time, IBM was under antitrust rules, and I had to be taught, along with anyone at IBM, that IBM had to price the hardware that they were manufacturing to account for the software costs. And this was about anti-competitive software bundling with hardware. It was really interesting training because it was from one of our finance people at IBM, and I didn't really have any exposure to financial training at the time. So I thought that was really interesting and supportive antitrust training. One other factoid about 1983. In 1983, 38% of the computer science degrees were awarded to women. And so it's another talk and another day, but there's all sorts of really interesting information about why 38% of the computer science degrees are not still going to women, but I was there. Oop, I think I let myself fall asleep here. I hope you're not falling asleep. So years later, I went to work for Microsoft. At that time, in turn of the century, 2000s-ish, Microsoft was an operating systems manufacturer and getting into more back office software. I worked in Microsoft Consulting Services in the Financial Services Group, FSG, and met many of the companies here today in my days at Microsoft. I wrote software for customers to help them get more out of their IBM operating systems and back office products. I used proprietary languages, MFC, Microsoft Foundation classes, and C# later. Anyone could write an MFC app or a C# app later, but they were really proprietary languages to Microsoft. And I had my second antitrust training. So in that one, they brought us all together and taught us that when we were with customers, we were not allowed to use words like crush or destroy when referring to competition. That was all about anti-competitive software bundling with the operating system, specifically a browser. So certainly times have changed since then, but it did start me even back then to think about the relationship that a company has with software. It's very important. So now, even later, I've been staring at code for over 40 years now. It's crazy. I worked as a software engineer and IT executive in financial services, insurance, reinsurance, lots of really interesting stuff. I eventually worked for myself, and I taught people how to code. I used a lot of open source languages, and I still do. I support open source efforts. I'm very happy to do so for NearForm. We do a lot of work in open source, and we do a lot of work in Node.js in particular for the OpenJS Foundation. And I just don't want to take any more antitrust training. There's the marvelous Robin Ginn and our OpenJS friends, and the world does run on open source. And at the end of this self-awareness experiment, what I've realized is that I've watched software evolve from a manufacturing mindset to a service mindset. And you may all be shocked to hear that I think you are all software as a service organizations. Nobody puts software in a shrink-wrap box anymore. And so, yay, thank you. So it changes your mindset a little bit about how you consume your raw materials and how you connect with your customers. So it really has been a really interesting journey for me. I'm kind of curious how you think of software in your own organizations, and that's where your OSPOs come in, of course. So let's move on from the lofty thoughts of awareness to safe consumption and strategic contribution. So for me, again, in any practice, I look for great practitioners, and I'm going to give some shout outs here. This is the first slide from a talk that you can actually see later today. Steve Huzak from Capital One. They are big consumers of Node.js, and we've worked with them, offered some advisory services and so forth. But he has a really great presentation on how Capital One harnesses Node in a safe and secure way and manages that. So Steve is with their OSPO. So I'm going to plug Steve as another great practitioner to learn from. And in general, if you haven't approached this topic, I would just say make sure that you do some threat modeling on your supply chain. Know how you're building your software, know how you're consuming software to put into that. So source integrity and build process integrity. There are a lot of great materials about that too. But anywhere that there's an attack vector is probably something that you should be thinking about and learning about. And there are a lot of great tools. Your open source dependencies are probably more than any group or any one person could possibly manually review and approve one by one, and especially as new versions come out. So I would say automate, 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 explore tooling. You heard today about software bill of materials. Understand, the recipe of the services that you're building to reach your customers, and understand what those dependencies are, and then automate the updates. To me, this is a lot like observability. You probably have DevOps observability in your systems, but this is almost observability of the components of your systems is also very important, especially when it comes to security. And I've got some great tools there. If you're interested, open source brings you quite a long way in this world. My group, my team wrote and contributed Is My Node Vulnerable? So there's some very simple things you can put in your build pipelines or in your local environments to help keep the developers in a secure world. And you heard today, you heard this morning, the very best thing you could do is get involved in the community, because there are a lot of great practitioners. And sometimes I feel like we all, at our various companies, even in NearForm, we tend to stay in our little bubbles and focus on our, KPIs. But I think it's really important as an individual, as an organization, to look out at the community and see what's going on, because there are some really great resources and wonderful practitioners that you can follow in your practice. That leads me to, strategic contribution. I've worked in regulated industries most of my career, financial services, did some work with healthcare. So I do understand the pain of being a regulated industry, and it has been really hard to get people to contribute, not that they don't want to contribute, but to contribute from a regulated industry. And my own observations in consulting. So I've been in consulting for the last long while after being in industry. I've worked with companies that will come up with something, or they'll solve a bug, and the big concerns are always about ownership and intellectual property. If you are not contributing back to the community and you just fix that software in-house, you might have a nice solution for your in-house software, but now that package out in the wild has got some new features, and you're sort of doing dual maintenance to merge things all the time. It gets quite messy, and you're missing out on community. It's not that you don't appreciate those things, it's that there's this kind of regulatory goo that gets in the way, as you all probably know. And then on the other side, publishing new projects, I've seen organizations, and usually it's around processes or small automation tools or whatnot. So they'll have a GitHub organization out in the wild, and they'll put things out in the wild, but there's no way for people to contribute back or do a pull request because regulated industry. And then I'll say, well, if you build it they may not come. And I think that's missing the point of open source that is community, because a piece of software is kind of like a toy at Christmas time, and if it's not used and if it's not evolved and if it's not fixed, it kind of goes to the island of misfit software. So if nobody is around that's interested in maintaining or supporting your project or doing documentation for contributors, the software kind of dies. So the last point there is actually a quote from one of the members of the team that I work with. And he worked with a customer. They had a GraphQL library that they were using from open source, and it really just didn't do what they wanted it to do, GraphQL adapter. So they actually sat down and wrote one that solved the specific need they had. Wake up. That's YouTube, but this is especially. So the organization was like, wow, we should open source this, but then they hit all these hurdles, healthcare industry. And I was like, well, do we have a good README? Do we have a good license? Do we have how to contribute? Do we have good linting in the project and a good build process? And the developer came up to me and was like, wow, this is a lot of work for such a small package. And I'm like, yep, that sounds like what my husband said when we had our first child. So open source, I read the quote recently that open source is free like a puppy is free. So it's not my quote, but I really like it. And so I will once again say, in your practices, look to great practitioners. So this is one in the room today. We have Brittany. Fannie Mae really did some really great stuff here about being in a regulated industry and also finding a way to contribute back upstream. I think of it sometimes as like a DMZ between your internal and the upstream community, but it really works and it's really interesting, and they've started, and you can talk to Brittany about it. She's amazing, but they have a small cohort of projects, and we're going to hopefully work with them and implement a few more like Node. So get involved, talk to great practitioners. And then one more, in the demo hall, you can find Lise Noble from Discover Financial. This was recently donated to FINOS as a project. It's the accessibility theme builder, because everybody, as a software as a service provider, you are writing software to reach your customers, to be consumed by your customers. And a vast number of those customers are maybe differently abled, colorblind, low eyesight, hard of hearing, maybe they use screen readers. So if you're not building your software as a service to reach those people, you're missing out on not just a huge segment of your market, you're also subject to regulatory fines. So I can't tell you how important accessibility is as a software as a service provider. And I really love what Discover did. Lise had a vision for this end-to-end accessibility that comes from requirements through deployment. There's some automation to it with Figma and things that your designers love to use, as well as your developers. So this was a really interesting solution to publishing your own projects. Contribute it to a foundation where they can help you build the community and not send your software to the island of misfit toys. So that's my practice around software awareness, safe consumption, strategic contribution, but it takes practice. I've been doing this a long time, and I do think technology gets easier the longer you do it. So I feel more at ease, but I also really empathize with a lot of the struggles in regulated industries. And if you don't have a practice, or you're trying to figure out a practice, as always, start small. Maybe just solve an issue like this GraphQL library, and then once you have something, okay, what do we do with it now? And how do we build a community around this? Do we want to build a community around this? And then ultimately, determine what the best path for you is. Everyone's got a different path. And then, of course, I can't say enough, automate. Get in touch with the to-do group if you're really early in your OSPO journey, because that organization under FINOS is really dedicated to providing information and support for OSPO building and OSPO growth, OSPO maturity. Again, more tools, repo linter, if you want to just run something against a code base, repo linter will tell you whether it's got a good license, a good README, a good how to contribute. So you can do some simple things and network with practitioners and participate in foundations like this one. And maybe it's just as simple as, what does software do for us in our organization? So, and I am between you and lunch. I'll take questions, but I won't be upset if you want to go grab lunch. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming.